What's the most out-of-line thing a doctor has ever said to you? He walked into work looking like hell. I mean pale, shivering, skin yellowing around the edges of his eyes, sweating through his shirt, even though it was barely 20 degrees in the office. We thought he was hungover at first, but it became clear by lunchtime that this wasn't a hangover or even a bad cold. He was slumped at his desk, barely able to sit upright, and kept wincing when he moved like his whole body was on fire. Someone offered to drive him home, but he waved it off, said he'd already been to 2 different doctors and even the ER the night before. They say it's just a virus, he muttered. Probably the flu. That would have been fine. Except this guy wasn't your average suburban office worker. He was an expat, had worked in various parts of Africa for years, construction and mining, I think. He'd had malaria 5 times before, knew the symptoms like clockwork, knew exactly what it felt like when it crept back in. And he told the doctors, told them clearly that he thought it was malaria and that he needed anti-malarials, but they brushed him off. It's not malaria, one of them said, because Australia doesn't have malaria, which to be fair, is technically true. We don't have endemic malaria here, but the part they didn't seem to understand, or didn't want to hear, was that malaria doesn't care what's endemic. Dormant parasites can sit in your liver for years and relapse. And this wasn't some hypochondriac self-diagnosing from WebMD. This was a man who had nearly died from the real thing multiple times, but they sent him home anyway, told him to rest and drink fluids. By the next morning, he couldn't even get out of bed. His flatmate had to help him to the car and drive him back to the ER. He said he only made it through triage because he was yelling by that point, demanding they run a blood smear for plasmodium. The nurse was hesitant. They didn't even want to run the test, but someone must have listened, or didn't want to deal with a dying man collapsing in the waiting room, because a doctor finally ordered the test. A few hours later, they came back with wide eyes and a new tone of voice. "Oh wow," the doctor said. "You do have malaria." He didn't even react at first, just nodded, said, "No shit, I told you that 2 days ago." They started treatment immediately. IV quinine, fluids, close monitoring. He ended up being admitted for almost a week, missed 2 full weeks of work, but he pulled through. The wildest part to me wasn't even that they missed it. It was the attitude. The complete certainty that because Australia doesn't have malaria, he couldn't have it. Like he'd been born and raised in Perth and had never stepped foot off the continent. Like international travel, or medical history, or someone's own lived experience somehow didn't matter in the face of a checkbox list of local illnesses. He came back to work a few weeks later, still pale, but eating again, cracking jokes, said the worst part of the whole thing wasn't even the fever or the pain, it was having to sit there, burning alive from the inside while people in lab coats told him it was all in his head. We never looked at that local ER the same way again.